with the new episode of the Ladies Lounge. I'm your host Sham Jamili Kanwala, and I hope you all are doing well. And welcome back to the another exciting episode of the Ladies Lounge. And with Sisemi Maya, today we are going to deep dive into the fascinating world of optical illusions. And these mind-bending visuals take our brains in mysterious ways. But how do they really work? Why do we see things that aren't really there? And that secrets lie behind these playful deceptions of the eye and mind. Let's uncover the answers together and let's discuss this amazing topic and one of the most important topic together with Sisemi Maya and learning together. So first of all, hello Maya, how are you doing?
Optical illusions. That's a really cool topic. Sounds like you're kicking off.
Yes, Maya, you're totally right. I'm looking for the great
Hey, are you
episode. So, first of all, Maya, without wasting time, we have to continue our today's podcast, and we have to start with journal and basic understanding, which can help us to understand the basics of optical illusion. So, first of all, Maya, can you tell us like what exactly are optical illusions?
still with me? So basically, optical illusions happen because our brains are trying to take when they interpret the information our eyes send them. It's like our brains are filled with apps, so we're making assumptions to quickly, and sometimes that leads to us seeing something that isn't actually there, or seeing something differently than it. It's really fascinating how we perceive the world.
Okay, that's it.
Still with me?
Okay,
Just
Maya.
make sure the
Yes,
audio's
I
all
am still with you. Just
right on
listening
your end.
to your answer. And now, Maya, can you tell us like how you define the difference between an illusion and a reality?
All right. Good question. So, reality is what's actually out there, the physical world as it is. An illusion, on the other hand, is a misinterpretation of that reality. Isn't there? It's that our brains are processing the information in a way that doesn't accurately reflect what's really happening. Think of it magic trick. The magician isn't actually making things disappear, they're just using techniques to make it appear that way. Everything's still
Okay,
floating.
that's great, Maya. That's yeah, you have shared a really important take of the magician. And now my can tell is that why do humans fall for optical illusions?
That's a good one. We fall for them because our brains are really trying to create a stable and consistent with the world, even when the sensory information is ambiguous or incomplete. We rely on things like past experiences, assumption about perspective, and how our visual wired. Optical illusions exploit those shortcuts, and when they do, perception gets tricked. It's not a vision; it's a feature of how our brains work.
Okay, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Just checking in. Are you still
Yes, I am still with you.
here?
Just
Very like
listening to
that.
your amazing answers. Just give me chance first, but to speak, then you have to speak for your question. Okay, Maya. And now, Maya, can you tell us that what role does the brain play in creating these illusions?
Absolutely. So, the brain doesn't just passively receive information from the eyes; it actively constructs our perception of reality. It's constantly filling in missing details, making inferences about depth and size, and organizing visual information. Optical illusions exploit this constructive process. The brain's attempt to make sense of ambiguous or misleading visual cues leads to the distorted perception we experience. It's less about what the eye sees and more about what the brain decides is there.
Hmm, okay, that's great, Maya. Maya, now our general understanding and basic understanding questions are ended, and now we have to discuss the main questions of this topic. And Maya, before that, I have a request that kindly explain everything in detail. That you are an A assistant, so just you answer inverted ones lines. So it is not enough for understanding. So you have to explain in detail. So it will be help us to learn better and help us to understand it better. So now, Maya, can you tell us that how does the eye perceive an illusion differently from a normal image?
Got it. No problem at all. I'll definitely give detailed explanations from now on, and I'll avoid one lines. I want to make sure everything is clear and helpful for you and your listeners by letting me know what works best. Let's dive into main questions.
Now, Maya, as I have already told you that my question: how does the eye uh, perceive an illusion differently as normal eye?
Okay, so that's a really good question. The eye itself doesn't really perceive an illusion differently. The problem isn't with the eyes themselves, but with how the brain interprets the signals the eyes are sending. The eyes are functioning as they normally would, detecting light and current, sending that information to the brain. However, in the case of an optical illusion, the visual information is either ambiguous or designed to mislead. For example, an image might have conflicting depth cues or colors that create a false sense of motion. When the brain receives this conflicting information, it tries to resolve it by applying its usual rules of perception. But rules, which usually work perfectly well in the real world, are being tricked. Essentially, the eye is faithfully sending the data, but the brain is misinterpreting it, creating the illusion. So it's not about a difference in how the eye sees, but a difference in how the brain processes what it sees. Does that make sense?
Yes, Naya, that truly makes sense, and your explanation totally makes sense. And it was so good explanation for general understanding. And now my question is like, why do our brains sometimes misinterpret simple patterns?
That's a great question, and it gets into some fascinating stuff about how our brains prioritize information. Our brains are constantly bombarded with visual stimuli, and to avoid being overwhelmed, they employ a sort of filtering system. They prioritize what they deem most important and quickly gloss over detail they consider less relevant. This filtering process relies on pattern expectations developed through experience. So sometimes if a pattern is subtle or unexpected, the brain might miss it. A trade-off between efficiency and accuracy. If our brains had to consciously analyze every single detail of every scene, we'd be completely overloaded. But this filtering can lead to us missing things, especially in situations designed to exploit those shortcuts, like optical illusions. It's a bit like pattern recognition software. Sometimes it makes a mistake because it's trying to move too fast.
Okay, that's great, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing that amazing thing with us. And now, Maya, can you tell us, like, can you explain how depth perception is like is detect an illusion?
All right, so depth perception is a really common area where illusions play tricks on us. Essentially, our brains use a number of different cues to judge how far away something is. These cues fall into a few categories: binocular cues, those that use both eyes, like retinal disparity, which is the slight difference in images each eye sees, and monocular cues, those that can be perceived with just one eye, like near perspective, texture gradient, and relative size. Optical illusions that mess with depth perception exploit these cues. For example, the Pondo illusion, where two identical lines appear different lengths because they're placed within converging lines, works by manipulating linear perspective. Our brains interpret the converging lines indicating distance, so we perceive the line higher up in the image as being further away, and therefore larger. The brain then automatically scales the size to account for the perceived distance, resulting in the illusion that the top line is longer. It's not that the lines actually are different lengths, it's that our depth perception system is being tricked into misinterpreting the scene. these illusions aren't just about visual distortions, they're about how our brain constructs a three-dimensional understanding of the world from two-dimensional images. Does that help clarify how it works?
Yes, Maya, that fully clarify that how it works. And now I can explain that the optical illusion reveals weakness in our system, visual system, or not.
Exactly. That's a really insightful way to put it. Optical illusions don't necessarily indicate a flaw in our visual system. Rather, they reveal the inherent shortcut assumptions that our brains make to efficiently process the world around us. They demonstrate that our perception isn't a perfect representation of reality, but rather a carefully constructed interpretation, and they highlight the areas where that interpretation can be vulnerable to manipulation. It's like finding a bug in a computer program. It doesn't mean the program is useless, it just means there's a specific circumstance where it doesn't work as expected.
Okay, yes, now you're totally right. Your explanation totally makes sense. And now, Maya, can you explain that what are the main categories of optical illusion?
Great. So there are a few main categories. We've already touched on some of them, but let's break it down. First, there are what are called literal optical illusions, which are caused by effects of light, color, and the physical environment. These illusions are relatively straightforward and can be explained by the way light interacts with our eyes. Then there are physiological illusions, which happen because of the overstimulation of our eyes and brain. Things like after images, when you stare at a bright color and then look away and still see it, fall in this category. But the most fascinating ones are probably cognitive illusions. These are the results of our brains making unconscious inferences and assumptions based on our past experiences and knowledge. These are the ones we've been discussing mostly. Things like depth illusions, ambiguous figures, and paradox illusions. These illusions show us how our brains actively construct our reality. Finally, there's a category called hallucinatory illusions, which are less common and often related to neurological conditions or drug use, where people see things that aren't there. Like, does that breakdown make sense?
Yes, Maya, that breakdown totally makes sense. And I totally understand your amazing answer because it was so easy to understand for us. And now, Maya, can you tell us that what makes a geometrical illusion like the Mueller layer effect so powerful?
Mueller liar illusion. That's a classic. What makes it is the way our brains interpret inward and outward pointing arrowheads. Inward pointing arrowheads create a sense of convergence, which our brains as a cue for closeness or shortness. The outward pointing arrowheads create divergence, which is interpreted as distant length. Then, because the brains are trying to account for these perceived as they incorrectly judge the lines with arrows as being longer than the lines with inward pointing arrows, even though they're the exact same length. Essentially, a misapplication of depth perception system to a two-dimensional image. This illusion is also thought to be influenced by our experiences with corners and edges in the real world. We're used to seeing inside corners as closer and outside corners as being farther away. So our brains automatically apply that logic even when it's not relative. Really sneaky way to brains.
Okay, that's great,
There's
Maya. Thank you so much for sharing an amazing explanation about it. And now, Maya, can you explain that motion illusions and why they appear to move? That is
are
so important question.
absolutely a really fascinating area. Motion illusions occur because of the way our brains interpret changes in visual information over time. Our perception of motion isn't based on actual movement, but on changes in the position, shape, or color of objects. The brain interprets these changes as movement, even if nothing is actually moving. There are several different types of motion illusions. Some, like the wagon wheel effect, happen because of how our visual system processes repetitive patterns turns at certain speeds. The spokes of the wagon wheel can appear to be moving backward or slower than they actually are. Other illusions, like after effects, happen when we stare at a moving stimulus for a while and then look at a stationary object, which then appears to move in the opposite direction. This happens because the neurons in our brains that are responsible for detecting motion become fatigued from the prolonged stimulation and then rebound when we look at something still. Essentially, our brains are trying to create a stable perception of the world. And when faced with conflicting or ambiguous information, they sometimes create the illusion of motion to make sense of it all. It's a testament to how actively our brains are constructing our reality, rather than simply recording it.
Okay, that's nice, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing amazing explanation about it. I mean, now can you tell us, like, are colorful illusions are more common than shape illusions or not?
That's a really insightful question. Generally speaking, colorful illusions tend to be more common, often more immediately noticeable than pure shape-based illusions. That's because color has a very direct impact on our visual system. Our brains have specialized cells for processing color, and these cells can be easily tricked by things like contrast, simultaneous contrast, and chromatic adaptation. Illusions often exploit these mechanisms, creating effects like after images or distortions in color perception. Shape illusions certainly exist, the illusions we've already discussed, but they often rely on more complex cognitive.
Yes, Maya, you can give. So it will be helpful for our students, and so you can. Yes, Maya, that helps us to know, really know about it. And now, Maya, can you tell us that which are the most famous optical illusions in history? Okay, nice, Maya. We need to go deep dive. Yes, Maya. Yeah. And now, Maya, can you tell us that can regions that like the canvas room really change our sense of size or not? Okay, Maya, that's so much amazing explanation. Okay, yes, I'm still with you. Just my internet connection is not so good, so that's why it is affecting our conversation. And now, Maya, can you tell us like, do people with different personalities can perceive illusions differently, or it is same for all? Okay, that's yes, nice. You just listening to your amazing answer. And that do magicians rely on optical illusion for tricks, or they do from their own? Okay, Maya, thank you so much for explaining that explanation in very good way. And now, Maya, my interview time is almost completed, so thanks so much for explaining everything in detail and for helping us to uncover the secrets behind the optical illusion. Today, we learned how our eyes, brain, and perception work together, sometimes against each other, to create these fascinating experiences. Optical illusion remind us that reality is not always what it seems. So stay curious, stay keep questioning, and remember sometimes the trick is done the way we look at things. So see you next time. Until Allah Hafiz in it, as always, Pakistan. Zindabad. Take care of you. Allah Hafiz.